Hi guys, today I'm going to discuss our topic today, which is linguistic variables. As cited in Swan 2004, a theoretical construct introduced by William Labov in 1966 to describe patterns of language variation, including the term sociolinguistic variables. So, a linguistic or sociolinguistic variable is a feature that has two or more identifiable linguistic forms or realization, termed as variants. For instance, in some parts of Britain, alternative forms are found for the third person singular with and without an inflectional marker, such as he reads or he read. These function as two variants with s and 0s of a linguistic variable. Similarly, Warda and Fuller 2015 indicate that a linguistic variable is a linguistic item which has identifiable variants, which are the different forms that can be used in an environment. For example, words like singing and fishing are sometimes pronounced as in singing and fishing. And this is called the variable ing, with its two variants, ing in singing and in singing. Hudson 1980 maintains that a variable is a collection of alternatives which have something in common. These variables can be substituted for one another without changing the meaning of the word. For example, ing brings together the velar and the alveolar nasals as alternative endings for the suffix ing. Variables of this kind call out for sociolinguistic explanation, precisely because no other kind of explanation is relevant. Conveniently, as Hudson 1980 concludes, then we call linguistic variables that require sociolinguistic explanation as sociolinguistic variables. Here in the slide, I'm going to list the types of sociolinguistic variables. According to Hudson 1980, page 70, there are different types related to the level of language, including phonetics, phonology, morphology, lexicon, and syntax, at which the variants are different. These types are listed below. First, we have phonetic variables, where the same phonological pattern has different phonetic realization. These are uncontroversial, and examples abound in the literature. For example, the English phoneme t has a range of alternative pronunciations such as glottal stop, and are like flap, like d-tab, alveolar stop, and so on, in which they are related to the same phoneme t. Second, we have phonological variables, where the same lexical item has alternative phonological structures. It could affect single lexical items, such as controversy with putting the stress on the first or the second syllable, or can affect the whole classes of lexical items. For instance, words such as house and heavy can be pronounced without the sound ha. Morphological variables, where the same word has alternative morphological structures as roots and affixes. For example, the presence or absence of the suffix s on the present tense verbs in places like Narrowik, where the local form is she sing, but the same people in the same area sometimes use the standard form as she sings. Lexical variables, where the same meaning can be expressed by two different lexical items, or in other words, where the two lexical items are at least partial synonyms. For example, compound pronouns like nobody and somebody seem to have exactly the same meaning. Other items, as Hudson says, such as no one and someone, which are preferable in writing rather than in reading, are also variable. Lexical variables are particularly important to distinguish registers. For example, words such as salt and git are synonymous to sodium chloride and octane, respectively. The last variables, which is syntactic, in this case, the same meaning is expressed by different syntactic structures, as in the case of lexical variables that are clear and agreed examples. But there is also a great deal of uncertainty, as Labov states in his book Negative Attraction and Negative Concord, 1970. Pairs like nobody saw it and didn't nobody see it, which are clearly different in their syntax, but express the same meaning. Other syntactic variables found in English are relative clauses, which may be introduced by words such as that, or by WH pronoun, such as who or which, or by the omission of these relatives. For example, the book that I bought, or the book which I bought, or the book I bought. In this slide, I'm going to list the problems that arise in the sociolinguistic variables that use in quantitative study. The fact remains that the most of the variation that has been studied by sociolinguists has been phonetic or phonological, which can lump together as pronunciation variables. According to Hudson, there are some problems that arise in the study of pronunciation variables. Here first, we have the problem of deciding which words are relevant to each variable. For example, ha variable. If some speaker, such as sa, has pronounced the word house without ha, giving as house, this seems to that house may be as irrelevant for other words such as our or honor. There is a good evidence that such speakers exist. Overextensions such as heat for eat. For example, if that happens, I will heat my yacht, show that their users do not know which words have ha in received pronunciation, and are scratching ha randomly among words that start with the vowel. The other problem includes the question of discreteness, in which it is hard to think of any variables which do not arise these problems. But it looms particularly large in the case of vowels. For instance, one of Trugel's variables in the Norwich study was the vowel a. The vowel in words such as after, cart, and bath. This vowel varies from back, which means a, to the very front law as a. Another problem concerns dimensions, in which phonetic dimensions for the vowel a variable is namely frontness or backness, or should include other dimensions such as nasal or oral. In syntactic variables, there are problems for sociolinguistic explanation, in which other disciplines offer better explanation. The close disciplines to sociolinguistics are either psycholinguistics or discourse analysis. For example, the criminal was apprehended by a policeman who happened to be passing at the time. A sociolinguist might try to relate the use of the passive to style level, but a sociolinguist might relate it to processing load, and finally, a discourse analyst might relate it to the writer choice. And here finally, we have the conclusion. We can conclude from this study that sociolinguistic variable is a feature that has two or more identifiable linguistic forms or realization, that the substitution of one another doesn't change the meaning of a word. And second, there are different types related to the level of language: phonetics, phonology, morphology, lexical, and syntax, at which these variants are different. And finally, we have in a quantitative study, linguistic variables offer problems that make the distinction between these variables difficult to be distinguished. And thank you for your listening.